Okay, so picture this. An event so huge it convinces tens of thousands of people to just drop everything, leave their homes, and march across the entire known world to go fight a war. This actually happened over 900 years ago. It was called the First Crusade. But here's the thing, this isn't going to be some dry history lesson, nope. This is a genuine historical puzzle, and we're going to try and solve it together.
I mean, this is the big question, right? Just think about that commitment. It's almost impossible for us to imagine today. What could possibly drive that many people to undertake something so massive, so dangerous, and so incredibly expensive? Well, the answer isn't simple, and that's exactly what makes this whole thing so fascinating. And you know, we are not the first people to ask this question, not by a long shot. For centuries, historians have been wrestling with this, digging through ancient texts, trying to get inside the heads of people who lived in a completely different world. So let's join the debate and see for ourselves why this is such a tough nut to crack. All right, let's dive right in. To even begin to understand why they went, you have to understand the world they were living in. And let me tell you, the late 11th century was a wild time of intense faith, constant conflict, and some really big changes. So you've got a few key things happening all at once. First, the Catholic Church is getting super organized and powerful. It's becoming a real force in politics. It's even trying to get all these knights in Europe to stop fighting each other for a change. But at the exact same time, you've got the Seljuk Turks taking control of Jerusalem, which makes it really hard and dangerous for Christian pilgrims to visit their holiest sites. And then, bam, in 1095, all of this comes to a head when Pope Urban II gets up and calls for war. Now, you might think the church would be totally against violence, but not exactly. See, they had this idea called just war theory. It was basically a rule book that said, hey, fighting isn't always bad. In fact, if you're fighting for a good reason, like, say, defending Christianity, then it's not just acceptable, it's the right thing to do. And that idea, it laid the perfect groundwork for a holy war. Okay, so the stage is set. But what about the actual people? This is where it gets really interesting, because their reasons for going are like pieces of a super complex jigsaw puzzle. One piece doesn't tell you anything. You've got to look at all of them to even begin to see the bigger picture. The first piece, and this is a huge one, is just pure, powerful religious faith. For a lot of these people, this was basically an armed pilgrimage. Jerusalem wasn't just some city on a map. It was the center of their spiritual world, the place where Jesus lived, died, and was resurrected. The thought of liberating it, that was a sacred duty, something they felt they were called by God himself to do. And then, the Pope offered the ultimate incentive. Get this, he promised a plenary indulgence. In simple terms, a complete, total forgiveness of every sin you've ever committed, a get-out-of-hell-free card. In an age where the fear of eternal damnation was absolutely real, this was a direct ticket to heaven. That's an offer that is pretty hard to refuse. But it wasn't only about Jerusalem. There was a political angle, too. The Christian emperor over in the Byzantine Empire had basically sent out an SOS to the West. He needed help fighting off the Seljuk Turks. So, for some crusaders, this was also about answering a call for help and defending fellow Christians from a shared enemy. And let's be real, not every single reason was so high-minded. For a whole lot of people, the crusade was also a golden opportunity. Life in Europe could be pretty miserable. There was famine, disease, and constant, brutal little wars. The crusade offered an escape, a chance for adventure, a way for a knight to make a name for himself, or maybe, just maybe, a chance for a poor guy to grab some land and wealth and build a better life. So you're probably wondering, how in the world do we know all this stuff from 900 years ago? Well, we have clues. Eyewitness accounts, letters, chronicles, stuff written by the people who were actually there. The only problem? The clues don't all point in the same direction, not even close. And this is where it gets really messy for historians. Take these two sources. On one hand, you have the Gesta Francorum, written by some anonymous soldier. It's all about the battles, the sieges, the warrior experience. Then you pick up the Alexiad, written by a Byzantine princess, and her story is all about the political drama and how much she distrusted these Western barbarians. They're talking about the exact same war, but it's like they're from different planets. And this quote from a priest who was on the crusade, it just nails the mindset. He saw this as a complete transformation. He's saying, look, these guys used to be warriors for hire, fighting for a bit of cash. Now they're fighting for God and getting an eternal reward.
It shows you he saw the whole thing in purely spiritual terms.
So you see the problem, right? Those conflicting clues, those different perspectives, that's exactly why this puzzle is so tough to solve. There is no one single simple answer, and that's why the debate still rages on today. This really gets to the heart of the challenge. Let's just break it down. 1, your main sources of information all disagree on what was most important. 2, every single person on this thing, from a rich knight to a poor farmer, had their own unique blend of reasons for being there. And 3, the way we look back and interpret all this evidence changes over time. We ask different questions today than a historian did 100 years ago.
And that's really the big takeaway from all this. The First Crusade reminds us that history isn't just a list of dates and names you memorize for a test. It's a living, breathing conversation. It's an ongoing investigation. And honestly, the debate itself is what keeps history so incredibly interesting.
And this isn't just some academic debate either. Understanding this event is critical because its consequences were absolutely massive, and they're still echoing in our world today. I mean, the fallout was huge. They actually did it. They captured Jerusalem and set up kingdoms there that lasted for almost 2 centuries. But that act also kicked off hundreds of years of conflict. It cranked the Pope's power in Europe up to 11, and it forever fused the ideas of religion and warfare together in the Western mind.
So, in the end, there's no single key that unlocks this puzzle. The First Crusade was a deeply messy human event. It was fueled by an explosive cocktail of motivations: incredible religious faith, deep-seated fear, raw greed, and a powerful sense of duty, all swirling together to send the world down a brand new and very violent path. And that brings the whole puzzle back to you. Now that you've seen the different pieces, the call of faith, the promise of heaven, the lure of adventure, the duty to help, which one do you think was the real engine? What was the true driving force behind it all? The debate's still open.